Welcome to another episode of Coffee and Q&A. Today we will be talking with Gijsbert Koren. Now, I've never met Gijsbert Koren, but he was introduced to me when I was telling people that I'm doing this series as someone who's trying to set up a very new way of owning business models. And I'm very curious what he has to say. He calls it steward ownership, and it's something that he's promoting and he's offering consulting and advice on. And I think the idea here is that ownership or financial ownership of a company can be quite different from, let's say, the value ownership or where the mission ownership of a company. And he's presenting a very different model for this. So let's listen to what he has to say. I'm going to give him a call in a second. Let's see what we can learn. Hey, Gijsbert. Thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm doing well. How are you, Titus?
Good. We haven't actually, just so people know as well, we've never really met. We only spoke very briefly for the first time, just yesterday, I think it was? Or the day before?
Yeah, just Friday maybe? Just
on
before
Friday.
the kickoff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was introduced to you by Nina, who's someone who's also in this interview series, actually. And when she told me your story, I was really intrigued to hear it. And I looked at your website and I was like, wow, this is fascinating. And I really wanted to talk to you about your experiences, your life journey, and also this concept of steward ownership that you're promoting at the moment. But maybe before we kick that all off, tell me a little bit about yourself. Who are you? Who is Gijsbert and what is he up to?
Yeah. Good question. Big question. Well, I'm 35 years old. I live in the Netherlands, in Zutphen, a small city. I recently moved here with my family. We used to live in Amsterdam, the capital city of our country. We actually moved here because we wanted to find a place where there's more space to live as a human instead of a consumer, so to say.
Okay.
So and I'm an entrepreneur. The last 10 years I worked on crowdfunding. I supported quite some companies and projects to raise money through crowdfunding to either start or grow their project.
And were those certain types of businesses or just any kind of startups that you were working with?
Mainly companies that had either a social or sustainable ID. Because, well, I think those companies, at first thing is that it's worth my time, so to say. And secondly, crowdfunding really works well if you're doing something that's bigger than yourself, and that has a positive impact. So it really fits social and sustainable companies.
Interesting. And you said a couple things I find quite interesting. Firstly, you said you moved to Zutphen to live more like a human and less like a consumer. So that sounds like there's certain things you're looking for in life. Can you elaborate a little bit?
So I think we live in challenging times. It's really, as a consumer, you get there's a lot of temptation around you. And the temptation is there because companies have to sell their products and services to be able to grow and survive. And we have created this economic system in which, growth seems to be the only option for companies.
Right.
So that means selling more to you as a consumer. Looking at the limited time we have on Earth, it's enjoyable to be a consumer every now and then. But it's maybe not the best way to spend our time.
Yeah. Was this then, because this series, by the way, that I'm doing is on sustainable entrepreneurship. So we're not only looking at business models, but we're also looking a lot at the individual, right? Like what drives the individual to, well, be whatever a sustainable entrepreneur is, which we're trying to figure out as well in this series. But what is the driver there? So for you, it almost sounds like it became too much focus on the consumerism and you wanted to change that in your personal, but also your professional life.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because I think growth and consumerism has an impact, or is such a strong driver that also negatively impacts the sustainable goals that we need to work for. The sustainable development goals, or
Right.
well, the Paris Agreement, any goal we might want to reach.
Yeah.
Biodiversity goals. So I think it's keeping us away from the things that are more worthwhile and that actually need our attention more. I think most people actually look for purpose. You might get distracted by other things, by the potential of earning more. But I think purpose is in the end what most people, achieve or value more than money. So yeah, if you're helping a client as a company, as an advisor, you can do it because you get paid or because you are good at it, and as a craftsman you value your own work and your clients value your work. But you can also do it because it contributes to a higher purpose. And for me, that felt like the best choice, right? To work on something I'm good at, to work for clients that appreciate what I'm doing, but then also choose the clients that actually contribute to a higher purpose. I think, and there's also when I worked for clients that didn't really have a higher purpose, if I may say so. Sometimes it felt like a waste of time. So I did need some reality checks, of course, to every now and then, right?
Yeah. Would you say, it's an interesting one. I'm just going to stay on this topic because I find it quite interesting. There's this idea of higher purpose. It reminds me of the typical kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs model that we always share. But I would almost argue that in my experience, some of these, let's say, lower tier purposes, right? Like the satisfaction of serving a client and making it feel like you can deliver good work, or the financial reward of that you need also to survive and to take care of your family or to progress in the more material aspects of your life. It almost sounds like you need to go through that for a while, and maybe you have done that too. I'm curious to hear if there was a transition point for you actually where you were quite satisfied with those things for a while because they weren't fulfilled yet, but then at some point in your life they became fulfilled, and it had that spillover effect of desiring something more, which is this higher purpose now. How did that happen for you, and when did that happen?
Yeah, good point. I'm not sure let's start by saying it doesn't account for everyone, right? So some people keep on focusing on satisfying their material needs, and they seem to be unlimitless.
Right.
And I don't know, maybe it gives a lot of extra joy.
Yeah, maybe they find a higher purpose in that as well, right? Because that's a good question. You say higher purpose, but your interpretation of higher purpose might be very different from mine, even though we might float in the same field a bit.
Totally agree.
What's your higher purpose?
Good point. Well, what I meant by higher purpose is stating that those companies or projects contribute to have a positive social or sustainable impact, or at least they're aiming to have.
Yeah.
Well, my personal higher purpose is to contribute any way I can and try to be the best at what I do. To it sounds a bit cheesy maybe to make this world a better place for a few people or many people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But are there, you mentioned the sustainable development goals. Do you also find yourself drawn in the, let's say, the activities or the projects you take on or the kind of work you do? Are you drawn to certain goals that speak to you more than others, for example?
To be honest, the sustainable development goals to me are really abstract. Um, maybe there was a lot of effort into making them not abstract, but to me they are so abstract. And when I see a few of the sustainable development goals icons with a certain project or on a company page, I don't know, it feels like I don't really notice what they mean, or
Right.
I recognize them like, and then I see, okay, they matched what they do with what the sustainable development goals say we need to focus on.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people also have a gut feeling of what is contributing to sustainable goals and what is not. And of course you can be wrong. So for instance, if you're producing a product and you hope or you even claim that it has a positive impact on our society, it might be good to do something like a life cycle assessment, right? To see what is actually the environmental impact. So sometimes you need more than your gut feeling, of course. But to me, those quite abstract or big goals don't really motivate me. It's not like I have one goal and I want to contribute to that one goal, right?
Right. It almost sounds like you look around in your life and you look for the things that speak to you and that you think are a worthwhile challenge, or like a societal area to improve, and then you go for that.
Yeah.
Just to touch on the life cycle assessment, how important do you think it is actually for companies to engage, or even citizens, maybe individuals, companies, to engage in some sort of impact assessment?
Yeah, I think it's really important. So I like to eat nachos, and
Nice. Specific, I like it. I don't know where this is going, but I'm enjoying this.
No, it was just random. Well, so there's when you go to any Dutch supermarket, there's one specific brand of nachos, and they recently updated their packaging, and they reduced the CO2 impact of their packaging by, I believe, 30 or 35%, something like that. And it's printed on their packaging.
Right.
So they try to, speak to people that are conscious about this.
Yeah.
But to have a lower CO2 impact, they mixed materials in their packaging. So instead of only having plastic, they now use paper, and they glued plastic on the paper.
Oh, wow.
So meaning you cannot separate. So what I try to say is you cannot separate them into the right recycling flow anymore.
Right.
So this really annoys me, right? So their marketing says, hey, the packaging is better, but I wonder if it's better because their previous packaging could be recycled. Their current packaging can't be recycled.
It's also interesting to know what their intention was. I mean, you have to really go to the management board and the people that developed the strategy to see, were they aware that it would be harder to recycle further down the supply chain? Or maybe they aren't aware of that and they really think they're doing something good. Yeah. Or is this a marketing gimmick?
Yeah.
Those are tough things, I think.
Yeah, totally agree.
This is maybe a nice link to what you're working on now, actually, because I feel like steward ownership is also really about setting certain accountability standards and ensuring that there's a certain mission is upheld within a business. Could you tell us a little bit about that, about the business that you've set up now and what it is, what you actually do? And then we can go into steward ownership a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, so I think around 2 years ago, I was helping a client to raise money through crowdfunding. And we were also looking for other sources of funding for bigger investors, actually.
Okay.
And one day, a bigger investor entered the offices and they made an offer. They said, we want to invest in your company, but we don't want any voting rights. And we demand all existing shareholders to give up their voting rights as well.
Oh, wow. Wait, was this like a social or a sustainable enterprise of sorts? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the voting rights were not to go to shareholders or to investors anymore. They were to go to stewards, people that were able to guide the company and to steer the company to actually achieving their mission, its mission. And then I thought, whoa,
Yeah,
this is a strange investor, right?
What was your first reaction? Were you like, hell no, this is weird?
Well, we were putting in a lot of effort to convince investors to step on board.
Okay.
And it was not stressful, but you try to accommodate the wishes of investors. And then this investor comes along, and instead of wanting more, they actually wanted less.
Crazy. It's like a system error.
Exactly. But when we had some time to think about this proposal, we realized that this was actually what the company needed. It needed to be able to focus on its mission and not diluting and giving away voting rights to people that were external, not being actually part of the company, but only, supplying money. And also having the ability to decide that the company would focus on a different mission because they had a large part of the voting rights. And I think this is a pitfall for every entrepreneur, but especially for sustainable or social entrepreneurs, that once you give away or once you sell part of your shares and more because you need to grow, you also sell voting rights. And it could mean that instead of working for yourself, for your company, you could end up working for your investors if they take over the steering wheel.
Right.
Maybe it sounds abstract, but because of this economic system of ownership, companies are actually a tool for investors to increase their wealth instead of a tool to realize their own mission.
Right. Well, or the mission is wealth in some cases, perhaps.
Yeah,
or it becomes
exactly.
that.
Yeah, exactly. And this is never, or let's say almost never, the reason for an entrepreneur to start a company. So I think we have created a system of shareholder ownership and shareholder value that doesn't really match what we expect from companies. So the idea of steward ownership is that you split voting rights and economic rights. And investors, they can get economic rights to compensate them for their risk they take. But they can never get voting rights. Voting rights should be in the hands of people that take care of the company.
Okay. And because you mentioned, I have so many questions, by the way, but just right now, you mentioned voting rights and economic rights.
Yep.
You said you pick stewards.
Yeah.
What is a steward? Who would be a good steward for a company?
Good point. So as an entrepreneur, when you start a company, I suppose you are the best steward. You have the idea, you have all the energy, it's your mission. So you're the one to decide which way to go. But after a while, it could become a board of directors or a management team, people that actually know what the company needs.
Right.
So instead of putting this, voting rights outside of the company, the idea of steward ownership is to leave it within the company.
But who are those stewards then?
Yeah, good question.
Who are the examples of the stewards? Because the entrepreneur is not the only steward, I imagine.
It could be that when you start as an entrepreneur, you are the only steward, but once you grow, maybe you find a co-founder or you hire a director. Those people that take up quite some responsibility could become stewards of the company in the future.
Okay.
And an example of a steward-owned company that's operating for over 100 years is the German company Bosch.
Okay, I didn't know that. Interesting.
Yeah, so they don't have any external shareholders. They have 10 stewards who have the responsibility and who have the actual legal voting rights of normal shareholders. And they decide in the shareholders meeting of the company.
Okay. And are they, or not necessarily in the case of Bosch, but when looking at the ideal kind of, let's say, the utopian steward ownership model, would that entail that you have quite a blend of stewards? So for example, that you would have citizens and I don't know, policymakers and other business owners, like what would be the ideal mix that we're looking for in steward ownership?
Yeah, good point. Well, I think if you want to, well, the basic idea of steward ownership is to keep voting rights within the company. So people working, so a quality requirement, so to say, of a steward could be that he or she should work at the company.
In the company, right? Okay.
Yeah. In the case of Bosch, there are 5 internal stewards, but also 5 external stewards that have a role in the society in which Bosch is active. Okay. So they also look at the bigger picture of Bosch in society. But if you start as an entrepreneur, I think it's best to keep it internal.
Okay. But one of the kind of the philosophies behind this model seems to be that by doing so, the kind of the tendency for mission drift to occur, that you focus too much on the, let's say, the economic value of the business, that's subdued, that's controlled to a degree because you have stewards.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'll be very honest, if I'm involved in a few startups myself, or I have been over the years, and there are moments where when I am one of the co-founders or the entrepreneur, have serious doubts whether my actual value or my interest in this business is financial or social. Even though it might start off social, I want it to be financially healthy, and I might go to extreme lengths to make that happen. So how does having internal stewards make sure that doesn't occur?
Yeah, good point. So having voting rights organized internally doesn't mean that you don't get advice from external people.
Okay.
So having a board of advisors could fit really well if you're a steward-owned company.
Okay.
You might even listen to them better because they don't have any, I mean, their intention might be true because they don't have any voting rights themselves, and maybe they don't have any economic rights themselves. So it might become clearer where their intentions come from. And as a founder, you could have, within the model of steward ownership, have voting rights, but also certain economic rights.
Right.
Well, at first you get salary, right? So those are economic rights. But what you should do within steward ownership is that you maximize the economic potential of what a founder can get from a company.
Interesting.
To make sure that the founder doesn't shift its target from the mission to profits. Yeah.
When you've pitched this to entrepreneurs, because I'm assuming you have pitched this to entrepreneurs, I can imagine people looking at you and being like, yeah, but dude, what if my business turns out to be like a multi-billion-dollar thing and I've set a cap for myself of, I don't know, X amount of salary. How does that work?
Yeah. Well, that's true. Well, let's say, suppose your company becomes a multi-billion-dollar company.
Yeah.
and you become a billionaire because of that. Well, one of the first questions you could ask yourself is, what do you need? Why do you actually need all that money?
Right. Yeah.
The second question could be, if you have that money, will you use it productively, or could the company use it more productively than you would? So the idea of steward ownership, to think in the best interest of the company instead of in the best interest of the founder or another shareholder. So
Wow.
The company might be a better place, a more productive place to use profits. So a company will not buy a second villa.
No, exactly.
A company will hire more people, right? So
yeah, right. But this is very fascinating because you're also really challenging our inner egos as individuals to kind of give up, to be humble in what we own, and to be. It's very countercultural. I would argue it is, at least. So you're quite radical.
Yeah, it might be, but you know what you get in return is more freedom, because you will never sell your voting rights to investors. So some entrepreneurs that have stepped into, let's say, this race of the Silicon Valley dream, where venture capital investors step on board of your company, might leave with the feeling of becoming kind of an employee or a slave of their investors. While you start off with your desire to be free as an entrepreneur, you end up in this shareholder system. So maybe you don't become a billionaire, but you stay free as an entrepreneur, which is maybe, and you could still become rich enough, right?
For sure.
And what is actually the chance of becoming a billionaire? Maybe the chance of becoming a billionaire is not that high anyway.
High anyways, yeah. Fascinating. And you've got a company, or would you call it a company, or is it more like a foundation that promotes this? How do you?
So we are not incorporated yet, although we are active for around a year now. So we are kind of a collective of entrepreneurs that think that steward ownership should be adopted by more and more companies and investors. So we are called We Are Stewards, and our goal is to stimulate the use of steward ownership.
Okay, and what's your business model for that? How are you doing that?
So at the moment, we invest most of our time free of charge, because we think it's just important. Every now and then, we actually guide, advise, and consult a company on the steps to become steward-owned, and then we charge a consultancy fee, an hourly rate. So that's at the moment our earning model.
Fascinating. Okay, and so next to this, you do other work as well to sustain yourself. And this is something you founded with some people as a collective.
Yeah.
What's next with this? What are your desires? What's your vision?
Well, it's quite hard to start as a steward-owned company at the moment, or to transition from an existing structure into steward ownership. So my hopes for the future is that there will be an official legal form for steward ownership, so it becomes easy to incorporate as such. And another thing I hope is that most investors actually think that they need both economic rights and voting rights, and you mentioned mission drift a little earlier, and even impact investors think that they need voting rights to prevent mission drift, right? To keep the entrepreneur on track. But even as an investor, if you step in the first investment round of a company, and then comes a second round and a third round, after a while, your share is so diluted that your voting right doesn't really influence mission drift anymore. And I've spoken to a few impact investors that have been kind of, not really kicked out, but overruled by investors that didn't have impact first.
Wow.
Well, the impact investor was actually the first investor to step on board. So for impact investors, steward ownership is also a tool to make sure that in next funding rounds, other investors will not take over the steering wheel.
Especially if they are financially oriented investors.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow, I'm very curious to see where this goes. I'm actually very happy that Nina introduced me to you. I think this is a really interesting case. I think it fits so well in some of the global trends we're seeing to do with, well, the SDGs as well, but just in, you know, the kind of desires and the demands of citizens with regard to how businesses function. Yeah, I really want to thank you for your time on this.
Thank you.
This has been great. I was wondering, do you have, as a kind of final word before we wrap up, do you have any tips for students that are thinking about setting up a sustainable enterprise, or that, you know, that want to engage in this field of sustainability a bit more? Where do you think the opportunities lie, or as an individual, what can they look for or work on?
Yeah, I think not only sustainable entrepreneurs, but most entrepreneurs start with a great idea and also a mission to make our world better, right? So even Uber started, well, maybe not as a social enterprise, but almost as a social enterprise to help taxi drivers to earn more while they are not helping their normal clients.
Yeah.
Well, and look at where this company is now, right? So most companies start off as a great idea, and steward ownership is a tool to stay true to that original idea, to protect it maybe from your future self, but even more so to protect it from investors and other stakeholders that step on board. And I think it's an initial idea for a company is always good. So it's good to protect that initial idea.
Nice. Okay. And then I'm gonna, yeah. So if I translate that for my own interpretation, there's some things I've really learned in this conversation. Actually, one thing is, you might have a good initial idea, but you need to preserve and protect it. And you might not yourself be the best person to do that always, or others might not be the best people to do that. So find new ways to do that. An example of this would be steward ownership. Another one is to be, I kind of put it this way, to rebelliously innovate. So, you know, just because ownership models exist, you guys are fighting for a new ownership model. So I think within sustainable entrepreneurship, you're allowed to fight for new ways as well. You don't have to fit into the old mold. Humility is another one I wrote down. Be humble and break your ego down a bit. So I think if you're going to embrace this kind of thinking, some of the stuff that is part of the startup culture now, you might have to free yourself of that a little bit. And that voting rights and economic rights don't have to be the same thing.
Great
It's
point.
a really interesting one.
Thanks. Good summary. Thank you.
But thanks, Gijsbert. And so I'm going to share this with students. I think they're going to have a lot to learn from this. I want to thank you for your time, and I hope we meet again sometime soon.
All right, Titus. Thank you. Hope so too.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.